Welcome back to episode 3 of the Climate Playbook. For this episode, we'll be talking about veils and how habits are connected to veils in a way that creates the pinch point that starves out our aspirational S2 self. I want to recap what we covered in episode 2 that brings us here in episode 3. And if I recap, what we had was we had a gap where we are free to adapt to any threats, whether it's distant or whether it's close. And where we are is we are stuck in this maladaptive place where we are like the baboon, and hopefully you got to see in episode 2 the actual video where the baboon was not releasing the prize, as the threat in this case was the African hunter putting a noose around it and pulling it away from that dome that his hands were trapped behind. So we have here where our desire is what we want. We want to be free to adapt to threats. Where we are is where we're stuck in a maladaptive way. And as a result of that, there's a gap between them. And I had proposed that gap can be broken up into a reactive problems. And remind you, this was the avocado war, where we can turn on and turn off quickly based on feedback, and we're good at that. However, we're not so good in the problems that require us to prevent. And if you remember, I had mentioned dams is something that you just cannot react to. You have to prevent that because of the scale, the level of coordination needed to prevent it from bursting, and just the toll that comes from the dam bursting. So we're poor in this area right here. And what I had suggested at the end of episode 2 was that we have a very strong cognitive grammar dealing with this level of response, but we're weak in the cognitive grammar for problems that require us to prevent. So I want to bring up in this epilogue is how can we connect to the main body, which is the veils? Where can we go and find or perhaps understand how do we lose that cognitive grammar, and perhaps how can we rebuild or recover that lost grammar for not so distant, not so near threats. So I did a little research and I came across a book, and it was very interesting. And perhaps this is where we can go into and find that lost grammar. Perhaps we can look into casinos. And the book I came across, and actually it's the podcast, is an author of this book, Addiction by Design. And the person's name is Natasha Dow Schul. And this is interesting because she had spent years doing research, field research in the casinos to understand how the casinos can manipulate the environment and manipulate the situation so as to create maximum, they call it maximum time on device. It really translates to maximum mindlessness. Remember, with casinos, you're in there, the odds are clearly against you. It's what I call dealer odds. So the way they can maximize their profit in your participation in your gambling, in this case, is to maximize the amount of time you have on the device. So casinos, they have that objective, which is maximizing time on device. And the way they do it is to manage your environment and your situations, or to manage the friction in the situation so as to maximize mindlessness. So this prelude right here is to tie in how does habits lead us to the point where it does not arouse our S2 aspirational state. Well, the casinos gives us a unique window into that. And in Addiction by Design, Natasha brings up the many strategies of removing friction. And friction in this case, and as I go through it, is simply in a situation where you had to pause, you have to reflect, you have to make a decision, you have to break the entrenched pattern of gambling, so as to, such as get money from the ATM, go to the bathroom. So what they have done in the casinos is that they have set it up where they remove the friction. And they do it in two ways. And the two categories I'm going to put here is ensuring that you achieve a state of disembodiment. That's the one column. The next one is to achieve a state of mindlessness. And it's really fascinating because it is, as we go through the items underneath this, anyway, it made me reflect, wow, I do these things without even knowing. It's an unconscious response to my environment. So let's look at disembodiment. Natasha says that there are no 90 degrees in the layout. So one way to relate is, there's a saying that, on Sundays, people are meandering. They're not really making decisions. So in some ways, if you look at a person meandering, they never really take a 90-degree turn in that pathway. They're just walking in this meander non-90 degrees way. So that's one way of relating to it. So there are no 90 degrees because they have found in psychology, if there's a 90-degree intersection, a person has to stop. It gives them they have to make a decision, left, right, straight, etc. The next thing they found was to have a low ceiling so as to create a cocoon effect. And they also found that if there's extra space behind you or above you, it actually creates anxiety. So that's the second strategy to remove friction. Remember, removing friction, that's what disembodiment and mindlessness, these strategies are being used to achieve those two states. The third one is low reflectivity. And this is both in terms of light and sound. And the idea here is when you get into a cocoon trance state, and they call it a ludic loop, you want to ensure that your senses, such as your eyes and your ears, do not get tired out, and therefore they make sure that the sound does not reflect as much and light does not reflect as much as well. Another strategy they have is personal waiter, or at least shared among a group, and concierge. And this is to ensure that when you're hungry, when you're thirsty, when your body is sending signals to interrupt that trance, that interruption is minimized by having somebody wait on you or provide you answers to questions if you're new in town, etc. Another one is they have special seats to improve circulation, and I call it just circulation seats. And with this, it simply does not ensure that there's no interruption to that trance, that ludic loop. And this way you don't have to get up and stretch, or you're feeling a cramp, or you're feeling a dead leg, etc. Charley horses, things like that. And lastly is human waste. Now in the research, Addiction by Design by Natasha, she does not mention how the casinos ensure that the human waste is being managed without interrupting the trance. But what she found out was that she encountered an alley of slot machines that were taken off the gambling floor to be cleaned. And when she had interviewed one of the workers there, found out that they had been urinated on. So this is the extent that this embodiment can create, is to the point where a person does not realize they had urinated on a slot machine. So that's for disembodiment. What happens for mindlessness? This is where it gets also interesting. They track you. And they track you with loyalty cards. Every time you get on a slot machine, it registers your loyalty card. They actually tracking your losses, tracking your playing patterns, and what they actually want to determine for two things. They want to figure out who are whales. And this term whales in this book are people who they can predate the most. In other words, they're willing to take big losses, or they spend maximum amount of time on the device. They also want to predict pain point. And this is essential because there is a negative association between loss and behavior. They want to make sure they interrupt that negative association. And I'll cover that as I get into details. So you ask yourself, what if I don't have a loyalty card? Well, a lot of the machines that have face recognition. So they are still able to track all this data to establish the whales and the pain point. So these are some of the things that I do to encourage mindlessness, or to what I call remove friction, so that you can be in this trance state. They feed you free alcohol. That's one of them. The second one is the sound from the slot machine. They have tuned it in the key of C. And apparently they have found in psychology the key of C is the most soothing note in the range of notes that you can get. Another one is, again, remember we're talking about removing friction, not breaking the trance. They have built-in ATMs in the slot machines itself. It's because if the mere act of getting up and walking to, let's say, across the street to a bank to get money, it's not only inconvenient, but it might interrupt what I call the gambling, the gambling habit. This what I call the dopamine chase. It might create a opportunity for reflective and ethical or moral behavior. So another thing from this book is they talked about when the slot machines went from a mechanical to a digital form. Instead of wheels tumbling, they actually have just a digital screen. And when they did that, when they went from mechanical to digital, they found that the odds of beating the slot machine went from the mechanical of 10,000, 1 in 10,000, to 1 in 13 million. So recognizing that will create a negative pattern, or there isn't sufficient positive reward to maximize the time on the machine, they devise ways of keeping you in play. And what they have come up with was freebies, vouchers, incentives. And that's tied, and usually what they do is they tie it to this pain point right here. So let's say you just experience a loss greater than what you had lost, let's say the week before or the day before, and this is where the program would trigger them to offer you a freebie, an incentive or enticement, such as a free weekend or a free meal, or a gift, for instance, like an inexpensive watch. And this is how they break the negative association related to these odds changing here. Another one is the casinos loaning you without collateral. And finally, they managed to gradually siphon with near misses. If you can remember in the old days with the mechanical slot machines, once you hit jackpot, nobody would gamble on it because they know that it completely depleted. So what they did is they figured out to maximize their profit, instead of boom or bust, they just have minor losses, and it allowed the person to continually play and maximize their time on that device. Additionally, they have near misses as a way to entice you to continue on the machine. And it could be, instead of 777, which is jackpot, you could get 77 and a cherry. And those near misses, the payoff is very little. However, it makes you believe that you're really close to getting a 777 jackpot. So all these things remind me of a documentary, and I'll provide the link to it. It's called The Century of Self by BBC. And in The Century of Self, Freud's nephew, I think it's George Bernays, he was hired by, I think, politicians first, and then it became corporations, how to manipulate the psychology of the masses to maximize either the voting, to induce people into voting a certain way, or to maximize their consumption. So this epilogue, I just wanted to give a tune to an orientation how we achieve disembodiment and mindlessness as we go after this lost language here. And the key thing is that we are removing friction so as to maximize the dopamine chase. I'd like to wrap up this episode by giving you a preview what I'll be covering in the next episode. Just like the casino, where we have disembodiment and mindfulness as two states that keeps you in this gambling trance, we too have an internal casino. In the next episode, we'll be talking about the internal casino within us, where we convert high friction situations into low friction through habits. Also, we're going to go through and take a look at how we experience our disembodiment and mindlessness as a way to bury harm from our acts that leads to ignoring those harm or completely burying it through blind action. and that we have a powerful context for staying on that repeated act, and that is maintaining the integrity of our daily existence. And this way we drive the harm into the background far enough that we can commit the act without feeling askance of the harm involved. So just a little housekeeping. If you like the video, please click like on YouTube, and that would help promote the work, as well as subscribe to the channel, as I'll be putting up new episodes every Wednesday. If you have any questions or comments, please post it on the video, as I'll take the 7 days break between postings as a chance to respond and clarify. So see you next week, where we can discuss this internal casino. Thank you.